Her heart shattered, but his silence spoke volumes. A story of love and duty. Welcome back to the channel where real stories speak louder than words. If you believe that silence can carry more power than 1,000 voices, you're in the right place. Before we dive into today's emotional journey, take a moment to subscribe, because tomorrow's story will move you in ways you never expected. Hey, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's step into the world of quiet duty, unspoken love, and unwavering honor. It was an ordinary day in London, and Jessica Carter, a 34-year-old mother from Vermont, was going about her workday when the phone call came. The sound of the voice on the other end hit her like a wave crashing into a rock. Her 6-year-old son, Ryan, had fallen. The news sent a chill through her veins. He had fallen from the top of a staircase, a terrifying 15 feet. She barely heard the rest of the words as they echoed in her mind. Traumatic brain injury. Her heart raced, her breathing quickened, and without another thought, she dropped everything and rushed out the door. Her only thought was to get to her son, to be there for him. She had been in London for work, but this was her child, and nothing mattered more than getting to him. As she jumped into a taxi, she tried calling her husband, Staff Sergeant Mark Carter. The phone rang endlessly, but he didn't pick up. She knew why. He was on duty at Buckingham Palace, guarding the very heart of the nation. As the Queen's Guard, Mark had taken an oath that demanded absolute focus, an unyielding commitment to duty, regardless of the personal stakes. Still, she needed him. Jessica arrived at the palace, breathless and desperate. She could feel the weight of every passing second pressing down on her chest. Mark was still standing at his post, the unyielding figure of stoicism, as he had been trained to be. The crowd was gathering to watch the ceremonial changing of the guard, their eyes glued to the spectacle. But for Jessica, the spectacle was irrelevant. All she could see was the man she loved, standing tall, his back straight, his face frozen in the discipline he had carried through years of military service. She rushed forward, pushing through the crowd, standing just 6 feet away from him. "Mark," she shouted, her voice shaking with panic. "It's Ryan. He's in the ER. Please just look at me." Her words were a plea, a desperate cry for attention from the one person who could make everything okay. But Mark didn't move. His eyes remained fixed ahead, unmoving, unblinking. He had been trained not to react, not to let his emotions show, especially not in a moment like this. The silence between them stretched painfully, and Jessica's voice cracked under the weight of the situation. She repeated his name, louder this time, but Mark stayed as still as a statue, his body rigid, his focus unwavering. His face, normally full of warmth and tenderness, was now set in a mask of stoic discipline. He could feel the coldness of the crowd's judgment creeping in. Some of them, tourists who had never seen anything like this, began to murmur among themselves. "Cold-blooded. Soldier," they whispered. "That's his wife, and he's not even looking at her?" Jessica's heart shattered as she stood there, helpless. Every instinct told her to grab him, to make him understand, to plead with him. But Mark had made a vow, one that he took more seriously than any promise he had ever made. Duty over emotion. Duty over everything else. Inside, however, the conflict raged. He wanted to turn to her, to hold her, to run with her to their son. But the rules, the unspoken code of the Queen's Guard, forbade him from doing anything but standing still, even as his heart screamed for him to move. In that moment, Mark wasn't just a man. He was the embodiment of a promise made long before he had ever met Jessica, a promise to the people of Britain that no matter what, he would not break. The seconds felt like hours, but Mark stood firm. He couldn't let himself break. Not then. Not there. Not in front of the world. Even as the weight of his wife's tearful eyes burned into him, he didn't waver. His role as a royal guard was more than just a job. It was an unshakable responsibility, a duty to something greater than his personal pain. He wasn't just standing there. He was protecting the legacy of honor, of duty, of everything the Queen's Guard represented. And in that moment, standing motionless before his wife, Mark was doing the hardest thing he had ever done. He was showing her, showing them all, that sometimes love wasn't about the words you said, but the actions you took, no matter how difficult they might be. The air around Jessica felt thick with tension as she stood there pleading with Mark, the words echoing in her head with every breath she took. "Mark, it's Ryan. He's in the ER. Please, just look at me." But he didn't move. Her voice trembled, with the desperation that surged through her veins. But Mark remained a stone wall, his gaze fixed firmly ahead, as though she wasn't even there. It felt like the world had shifted, and Jessica was caught in a storm of emotions: panic, helplessness, and disbelief. Every second felt like a century as she stood just a few feet away from her husband, begging for him to acknowledge her. But he didn't. Not even when she called his name again, louder this time, her voice breaking under the weight of her emotions. There was no response, no flicker of recognition, no sign that he even heard her. The crowd, however, was keenly aware of the silent standoff unfolding before them. Some of the onlookers, mostly tourists from America, began to murmur amongst themselves. The whispers started as faint as a breeze, but they quickly grew louder. "What's wrong with him?" one tourist asked, clearly puzzled by the scene. "That's his wife. Why isn't he moving?" Another added, the judgment evident in their voices. Jessica could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their scrutiny bearing down on her already fragile state. She wasn't just the wife of a soldier now. She was the woman pleading for the life of her child, and all she was getting in return was cold indifference. It felt like the entire world was judging her, judging Mark, and there was nothing she could do about it. The murmurs grew louder, sharper. "Cold-blooded soldier," one woman whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. "How could he just stand there like that while his wife is crying?" Jessica's chest tightened as she felt the sting of their words. How could they understand? How could they know the weight of what Mark had sworn to do, the oath that had bound him to his duty? He had served 2 tours in Iraq, seen the horrors of war, and still, he stood unwavering, following the code that had been drilled into him. For years, but none of that mattered to the crowd. They didn't see the years of sacrifice, the internal battles Mark had fought. They didn't understand that he was standing there, unmoving, not because he didn't love her, but because he loved them both too much to break the promise he had made, not just to her, but to his country. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jessica could feel her heart racing, her emotions threatening to spill over. She looked at him. This man she had loved, and yet in that moment she didn't recognize him. The man who had been there for her through everything, the man who had promised to never let her down, was now standing before her, as still as a statue, offering her nothing but silence. As the crowd's murmurs continued to grow, Jessica's hands shook. She wanted to scream, to run up to him and shake him, to make him understand that their son was in danger. But something held her back. Perhaps it was the sheer force of Mark's discipline, or perhaps it was the part of her that understood the weight of his duty, even if it broke her heart. She had always known what he did for a living. She had always understood that his role as a royal guard came first, no matter what. But this felt like too much. Her heart was shattering in her chest as the world around her seemed to blur. She stood there, helpless and broken, her voice lost in the sea of onlookers who couldn't understand the depth of her pain. The clock seemed to tick louder in her mind. As the distance between her and Mark grew wider, the gap between their worlds seemingly impossible to bridge. It wasn't just a disagreement. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a painful, heart-wrenching choice. A choice Mark had made, and one that Jessica would have to accept, even if it tore her apart. She wasn't sure how long she had stood there, but by the time she finally took a step back, she realized something. In that moment, the crowd wasn't the problem. It was her. She had been asking the wrong question all along. Jessica turned away, her heart heavy as she moved through the crowd, the whispers still swirling around her. She felt the sting of their judgment, but she knew deep down that the real battle had just begun, not on the outside, but in the silence between her and the man she loved. 45 minutes. That's how long Mark stood motionless, the hours stretching out like an eternity. The thick, ceremonial air of Buckingham Palace had surrounded him, as it always did during the changing of the guard, but today was different. Today, every moment felt like an impossible weight pressing down on his chest. He had not moved, not even a single inch. The crowd, still buzzing with whispers about his wife's desperate plea, slowly began to dissipate. But Mark's gaze remained, fixed forward, as it always had been in the face of duty. He had done his job. The sacred tradition of the Queen's Guard had been upheld, and the ceremony was complete. But inside, it felt like a battle he was losing. Every fiber of his being wanted to run to Jessica, to hold her, to be there for their son. But he knew what the price of breaking protocol would be. It would be more than just a failure to his country. It would be a failure to himself. When the final words of the ceremony were spoken, Mark silently moved from his post, his shoulders tense, his face devoid of emotion. He didn't look back at Jessica, not even when he felt her presence still burning in his chest. He could feel the weight of her gaze on his back, but he couldn't let himself turn. It wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about something more profound. It was about living with the promise he had made, and the commitment to something greater than his personal desires. As he walked toward the guard barracks, the sounds of the bustling palace faded into the background. There was nothing left now but the quiet hum of his thoughts. The heavy boots that had marched through countless ceremonies were now weighed down by the crushing thoughts in his mind. He was a man torn between love and duty, each step pulling him in two different directions. He reached the barracks and entered, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. Inside, it was dim, a stark contrast to the bright, bustling palace grounds. Here, there were no eyes watching him. No cameras, no crowds, just silence. The silence of a man with nothing left to say, nothing left to give. Mark needed a moment to breathe, just 10 minutes to collect himself, to process everything that had happened. He walked straight to the armory, the one place where he could be alone with his thoughts. The walls were cold, the air still, and the only sound was the soft creaking of his boots against the stone floor. It was in this quiet solitude that he allowed himself to break. Not physically, but emotionally. He sat down at a small wooden desk, his hands trembling as he pulled out a piece of paper. The pen was heavy in his hand, but he forced himself to write. His thoughts spilled onto the page, words coming in jagged bursts, each one more difficult than the last. "Jess," he wrote, his handwriting shaky but resolute. "I see you. I see all of you. But if I had turned to you, if I had broken form, I would have given the wrong message to everyone there, to all those people watching. I had to be still. I had to be strong. For you, for Ryan, for everyone." He paused for a moment, the pen hovering above the paper as he struggled to find the words. It felt like a lifetime had passed since he last spoke to her, but there was so much left unsaid. "I made a promise, Jess, to my country, to you, to us. But I also made a promise to Ryan. I had to stay strong because I know that deep down that's what he needs right now. He needs a father who can stand tall, even when everything inside me is screaming to run to you." Mark swallowed hard, the lump in his throat threatening to choke him, but he pushed forward knowing that he couldn't afford to hold back. "Please understand. I didn't ignore you. I didn't not love you. But my duty is what kept me standing still. And I would do it again, 1,000 times over, for you and for him." His hand shook as he signed the letter, and he sealed it with the small Queen's Guard pin he had carried with him for 5 years. The same pin that had come to symbolize everything he stood for: honor, duty, and love. He stood up, wiping his eyes quickly. There was no time to linger on the pain. He had to send the letter to Jessica. He had to find a way to make her understand, even if it was too late. As he folded the letter and slid it into an envelope, Mark's heart was heavy. He had done his duty, but at what cost? He had stayed still when all he wanted was to run, to be with her, to be a father. But duty had come first. And now, all he could do was hope that his sacrifice would be enough. The flight felt endless. Jessica stared out the window of the plane, her mind far away from the serene clouds outside. The hum of the engine and the soft rattle of the overhead. Compartments faded into the background as her hands trembled in her lap. The unopened envelope lying there, taunting her. The letter had been handed to her by one of Mark's fellow guards right after the ceremony. No one had said much. There were only glances of sympathy, silent acknowledgments of the weight she must be carrying. And now, here she was, on her way, back to America, in the quiet solitude of her seat, waiting for the right moment to face what her husband had written. Her fingers grazed the edge of the envelope, feeling the cool metal of the Queen's guard pin sealed inside. It was heavy, symbolic of the man she had married, the man who had always placed duty above all else. But that wasn't the man she had been begging to see. The man she had begged to turn around was the one who had kept his eyes forward. The one who had shut her out in the midst of the most desperate plea she had ever made. But the letter, she needed to know what he had to say. She had been angry, devastated, but she knew she couldn't keep running from the truth. Mark had chosen duty over everything in that moment. But what did that choice really mean for them? For their son? For their future? With a deep breath, Jessica tore open the envelope. She unfolded the paper carefully, almost reverently, as though the words within held the key to understanding the man she thought she knew. As her eyes scanned the page, the words seemed to blur at first, her tears making the ink run. But she forced herself to read, to understand. "Jess," the letter began, "I see you. I see all of you. But if I had turned to you, if I had broken form, I would have given the wrong message to everyone there, to all those people watching. I had to be still. I had to be strong. For you. For Ryan. For everyone." Her heart twisted as she read those words. She wanted to scream at the letter, to shout, "How could you just stand there, Mark?" But as she continued reading, the anger slowly began to fade. Mark had always been a man of principles, a man who valued honor above all else. But in that moment, standing motionless, hadn't he failed to see the real urgency, the real crisis? Didn't she deserve his attention, especially when their son's life was at stake? "I made a promise, Jess," the letter continued, "to my country, to you, to us, but I also made a promise to Ryan. I had to stay strong because I know that deep down, that's what he needs. Right now. He needs a father who can stand tall, even when everything inside me is screaming to run to you." The words punched her in the gut, each one sinking deeper into her chest. A father who can stand tall. She had heard that before. Many times, in the way Mark had lived his life, in the way he had always kept his emotions locked away, buried beneath layers of duty and pride. But this was different. She needed him in that moment, not as a soldier, not as a symbol of unshakable strength, but as her husband, as a father. The letter was signed with a final heartfelt plea. "Please understand. I didn't ignore you. I didn't not love you, but my duty is what kept me standing still. And I would do it again 1,000 times over, for you and for him." Jessica wiped away the tear that fell down her cheek. She couldn't fight the flood of emotions any longer. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to tell him how much it hurt, how the silence of that moment would haunt her forever. But instead, as the tears blurred her vision, a different truth began to settle in her heart. Mark hadn't turned away because he didn't care. He had stayed still because he believed in the deepest part of his soul that it was the only way to keep his promise to both of them. She whispered softly to herself, "I asked you to choose me, but you chose all of us." The words were bittersweet, filled with love and pain, but they rang true. He had chosen to honor something greater than himself, and as much as it tore her apart, she had to accept that. She had to understand that Mark's commitment to duty didn't erase his love for her or for Ryan. It was simply the way he knew how to show it. As the plane descended, the seatbelt sign flickered on, and Jessica's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, wiping away the remnants of her tears. It was a text from the hospital. "Ryan has woken up. He's going to be okay." In that moment, a wave of relief washed over her. The man she had married, the one who had chosen to stand still, had made the right choice after all. Their son was going to be okay. And maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to forgive him, both for what he did and for what he couldn't do. 2 weeks had passed since Jessica had read the letter, 2 weeks that felt like a lifetime. She had cried. She had felt anger, confusion, and a deep sorrow. But in those 2 weeks, something had shifted inside her. The tension that had built between her and Mark, the distance she had felt between them on that fateful day, had not gone away, but it had evolved. She could no longer cling to the sharp edges of her pain. Instead, she found herself examining his decision, the weight of his choices, and the unwavering commitment he had shown not just to his duty, but to her and to their son. Jessica had returned to London, this time not in search of Mark, but for something else, a kind of closure, perhaps. Or maybe it was a way to honor what had happened, and the man who had stood so still in the face of the greatest emotional conflict of his life. She didn't know exactly, but she had to be there, to witness it for herself, to find a way to understand. How he had lived through that moment with such unshakable resolve. The crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace as it always did for the changing of the guard, and Jessica, now a part of that crowd, stood silently among the tourists. She had returned to the palace not as a wife desperately trying to reach her husband, but as a spectator, a silent observer, standing in the same spot where she had once called out to him, hoping for him to turn. This time, though, she knew better. She had come to understand that sometimes love wasn't about words. It wasn't about the desperate pleas or the tearful screams. It was about strength in silence. As she stood there, her hand gently placed over her heart, she saw Mark. He was there once again in his ceremonial uniform, standing tall, the same unyielding figure she had seen that day. His face was still, his eyes fixed forward. He was exactly the same, yet somehow different. This time, Jessica didn't see the soldier she had once married. She saw a man who had made an impossible choice, a man who had sacrificed his own personal pain for the sake of something greater. And in that moment, she understood. Mark's posture was as rigid as it had always been, but this time Jessica didn't feel the sting of rejection. Instead, she felt something else: respect. He wasn't standing there to hurt her, to shut her out. He was standing because that was what he had sworn to do, and because, in his heart, he believed that standing still, even in the face of her pain, was the only way to honor their love, their family, and the responsibility he had to something larger than both of them. As Mark moved into his position, Jessica didn't call out to him. She didn't try to break the silence between them. Instead, she simply watched him, her heart aching but full of an understanding she hadn't had before. She understood why he had made the choice he did. She understood why he had stood still, even when everything inside him must have screamed to turn, to run, to be with her. And in that understanding, she found a kind of peace, a quiet acceptance of the man he was, of the man she had always known him to be. When the ceremony ended, and the crowd began to disperse, Jessica remained standing there, just a little longer. She saw Mark glance in her direction, his gaze lingering for a moment longer than usual, and in that moment she nodded, just a small, subtle gesture. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't for the crowd. It wasn't even for him. It was for herself. It was for the part of her that had been torn between her love for him and her pain. It was a gesture of understanding, of silent forgiveness. Mark didn't smile. He didn't move. But there was a shift in his eyes, something softer there, a Flicker of the man he had always been. Someone who had done what he believed was right. Someone who had given everything for his country, for her, and for their son. He didn't need to say "I love you" out loud. His silence spoke volumes. As Jessica turned to leave, her heart felt lighter. She had come to understand the true meaning of love, of sacrifice, and of duty. She had come to realize that sometimes, the most profound expressions of love are the ones that remain unspoken, the ones that you show through your actions when words fail. You don't always say, "I love you" out loud, she thought to herself. Sometimes, you say it by standing, still when your heart screams to run. And in that moment, Jessica knew that Mark's love for her, and for their son, was stronger than any words could ever express. If you've made it this far, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this powerful story. Mark's sacrifice, Jessica's, heartbreak, and the silence that spoke louder than words. What do you think about the choices they made? Can duty and love coexist when the stakes are so high? Was Mark right to stand still even when his heart was breaking? Or should he have broken protocol to be there for his wife and son? This story is full of emotional tension, and we want to know how it made you feel. Sometimes the hardest decisions in life are the ones that seem impossible to understand at first. But as we saw with Mark and Jessica, love can be shown in unexpected ways. Let's talk about it. Share your thoughts, reflections, and opinions in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between duty and love? What do you think it takes to make the right call when everything is on the line? We love reading your stories, so don't hold back. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to join our community. We have more powerful stories coming your way soon.